a really good example is my New England Patriots were top 3 in almost every category we care about for defenses last year, but I cannot draft them as a top 3 fantasy defense this year because they open up with games against the Eagles, the Dolphins, and the Cowboys. So you're going to draft them. The Eagles are probably going to smash them in week 1. I'm sorry to all my other Patriots fans. I feel like I'm Judas on this podcast saying that to these guys.
Talking to a couple Birds fans here. We're cool with it.
Yeah.
All across the fantasy universe, welcome one and all to the 2-Point Stance, powered by FantasyPoints.com, your one-stop shop for fantasy football news, betting, DFS advice. And today, folks, whether you're in the backyard grilling like Mr. Dolan was, or maybe getting some fast food drive-through like I was, you are going to take something special away from this show because it is a topic that all of us wrestle with year in and year out in fantasy football. And it's how do I draft and stream these damn defenses and special teams? We got a special guest with us, new writer to FantasyPoints.com, Mr. Ryan Heath. Before we bring him in, Joe, welcome. Welcome back. Good to talk to you, my friend. What's going on down there in South Kakalaka?
It's a Kakalaki del Sur, as we call it here. Actually, I'm the only one who calls it that. It's a big golf week here in South Carolina. The PGA Championships this week, but more importantly, the grinder, Tom Brawley, and a couple of my other buddies are coming down. We're going to play 3 courses here in the upstate area, including the Walker course at Clemson University, which is a phenomenal course. Makes my old home course, the blue course at Penn State, look like a putt-putt course. I played like absolute dog shit the last time I played there, so I'm going to try to be a little bit better, but it's a big golf week here. There are no other sports that exist outside of golf and fantasy football. And the Phillies exist right now, so as long as they get a 5th starter. But it's good to talk to Ryan. He is a brand new contributor at FantasyPoints.com, and we love highlighting the young and up-and-comers who, in my opinion, he's already arrived. Drake, we've got him. We've had Jake Tribby on to talk spring. We're bringing these young guys on the podcast, Ryan and Jake. Jake comes on to talk spring football, but by the way, he's a psychopath. He loves it. So it's like Ryan's coming on to talk defenses. So maybe not the most sexiest topics that there are to talk about, nonetheless important. And Ryan just had, and I'm going to let you introduce it and let Ryan explain it. Just in my opinion, maybe the best piece on defense special teams I've ever read in fantasy football. He did a great job. You can check that out up at the website, and we're going to talk about it today.
Yeah, wait till we bring on the kicker expert next week. Anyways, so Ryan Heath, follow him on Twitter, folks. He is at QBL Ryan. This is a young gentleman here who's fresh out of those college streets. Ryan, welcome to the show. I'm jealous here. Do you miss college life already?
Oh, I absolutely do. Thanks so much for having me, guys. Very excited to be on here. But yeah, right now, so I'm a year out of college right now. So the people that were a year behind me are graduating right now. I'm seeing like all their Instagram stories and stuff of them doing all the graduation stuff. I'm like, oh man, like what happened to me in the last year? Like, yeah, man, it's tough just thinking back to those days already.
I graduated college in 2003. So we'll move on. But you're all about grinding the edges that matter in fantasy football. And one of those edges is defenses and special teams. And there's so many times we're sitting in our home league draft and, it's time, we got to get a kicker and a defense. That's when guys start getting up. They start cracking another beer. Joe starts, pounding Evan Williams bottles. And everyone just kind of forgets about those positions. But if we want to win, there's actually a method to the madness, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Let's start with this. How predictive can we be with defensive special teams? Because their stats, though, like sacks and turnovers, really don't correlate year to year. So is there anything out there that does and should lead us to finding those defenses that we should be drafting?
Sure. So we can't be as predictive as pretty much any other position in fantasy football. So just to hold expectations in here, we don't really have the secret sauce for defense, but there are things we can look at aside from, as you mentioned, sacks or turnovers that aren't very sticky at all year to year. In fact, one of the best things we can look at is actually just the Vegas win total over under that we have in the preseason for each of these teams. There's a lot of reasons why, but it really does a good job of pricing in a lot of the qualities that we would look for in a fantasy defense. So obviously, number one is just how talented their defense is, but also their offense, because offense matters as well for a fantasy defense. You need at least a competent quarterback that can keep the offense on the field and the defense off the field. That tends to help out a lot.
I don't know if it was Lee Corso or Brent Musburger, but one of them said, this is my favorite line ever. He goes, there's a man in the desert who knows something, and I'm going to go with that man. These guys know what they're talking about. It's not rocket science.
Yeah, Las Vegas would just be a desert town if it wasn't for them being good at their jobs. No, now Ryan, the question I have is, and maybe you can't answer this, and you obviously go into great detail in the article, which is appropriately titled "How to Draft and Stream Fantasy Defenses." But how much does a defense being a good defense matter for fantasy? Like, in terms of, let's just say the metric is yards. How much does that matter, yards per game? Or are there other factors that really you try to separate out? Because, again, teams don't seem to repeat as the top fantasy defense every year. Does being a good defense actually matter the way being a good offense matters for fantasy football?
Yeah, being a good defense does definitely matter, but as you're kind of alluding to, there are a lot of other situational factors that sort of surround it. So schedule is really one of the biggest, and there's a couple reasons for that. The first one is that there are defenses that you can hold on to for the entire season and mostly play in every single game. That's maybe 3 or 4 defenses every single year. Aside from that, you are best off streaming and picking up a defense based on a matchup every single week. And by doing that, you can get like top 5 defense production equivalent just by playing the matchup. So schedule, I would say, is a really, really big factor. And it's the reason why certain teams that I have really high in my rankings or much lower than you might expect in my defense rankings are kind of deviating from what you would expect. So for a really good example is my New England Patriots. We're top 3 in almost every category we care about for defenses last year, but I cannot draft them as a top 3 fantasy defense this year because they open up with games against the Eagles, the Dolphins, and the Cowboys. So you're going to draft them. The Eagles are probably going to smash them in week 1. I'm sorry to all my other Patriots fans. I feel like I'm Judas on this podcast saying that to these guys.
Talking to a couple Birds fans here. We're cool with it.
Yeah, I know you guys, that's music to your guys' ears, but as soon as the Eagles go out and do whatever they're going to do to the Patriots in week 1, they're going to come off that, go to the Dolphins and the Cowboys. They're probably not going to produce against these teams. They're probably going to get dropped. The Patriots defense is going to be great if you don't draft them and wait until someone drops them. That is how I would approach them. So yeah, that's how a really good, talented defense can be not great as far as which one you want to draft in fantasy.
So one of the things I want to talk about, and this is going to sound like a cop-out from somebody who's in the rankings business, but if we would be doing our subscribers a disservice at the website, we would be doing our listeners a disservice if we don't project fantasy defenses. And if you're doing a projection, it's always going to come out, oh, the most fantasy points is your number 1 ranked defense. But I think herein lies some of the fallacy of like rankings contests and how things go in that regard, because man, I would even imagine like the number 1 defense in total fantasy points. In my opinion, it is rare that a defense is one that you want to pick up and kind of start the entire year. I think maybe the Eagles were that this year because they had so many sacks, but it always seems to me that like I'm thinking back to the Jaguars of 2017 when they almost went to the Super Bowl on the strength of that defense. And everybody was drafted them 10th round. Like that stuff doesn't happen anymore. But could you Ryan, am I on the right path? Is there kind of a fallacy, maybe more of a disconnect with defenses from season-long rankings vis-a-vis how useful these defenses actually are?
There absolutely is, yeah. As I kind of said, there you will maybe get one or two defenses in a season that you're comfortable starting in every single matchup. What you're saying with the Jaguars there gets at another important point, which is defensive talent in general is just much less sticky than offensive talent every single year. There have been a million studies on this, looking at expected points added for play on the offensive and defensive sides. It's so much stickier on offense, probably because on offense, it comes down to how good is the quarterback. Most of those good ones are on like franchise QB type of contracts. They're there for the long term. Defenses have much more personnel turnover, especially a lot of scheme turnover generally. So just because a defense seems to all come together and click in one year definitely does not mean it will in the following year.
You had a great little story in the article, which is, again, up at fantasypoints.com, where you talk about efficient versus inefficient markets. And you use this great example of Tesla and Panasonic. Break that down for our audience to kind of, extrapolate the thought of this is a good defense because the metrics say so, but maybe like what Joe's saying with the rankings, maybe they're not the greatest defense for our fantasy lineups.
Sure. So that story is meant to sort of explain why we should care more about what Vegas thinks of these teams with their win totals versus these other stats that we have for them. So imagine that you are thinking about investing in Tesla. So I'm not a huge finance guy, but I do know that Tesla as a stock is very volatile. It can just completely tank or go up like crazy in a single day based on what Elon Musk decided to tweet. So It can be really hard to look at Tesla's stock valuation and say, okay, this is a good representation of how valuable their company is, right? So if you want a good valuation of Tesla, you can actually look to a stock that is correlated with their valuation, but that is much more stable and is much more efficient, is much more grounded in the actual fundamentals of that company. So if you look at Panasonic's valuation, if Panasonic has a good year, if they find a way to supply batteries to Tesla easier and cheaper, that should increase the value of Tesla stock. It may or may not, because Tesla stock is inefficient, but we know Panasonic stock is efficient, so we can use that to get at least a decent idea of how valuable Tesla is. And I feel like I'm spinning circles in this analogy right now, but the point is that the Vegas win total over unders are an efficient market. There's millions and millions of dollars poured into these every single offseason. The stakes for them being right or wrong are much higher than the stakes of, say, the ADP on whichever fantasy platform for your defenses. So that's kind of why you should just trust the win totals as opposed to the ADP or the sack totals or whatever it is, because we know that these win totals are more predictive, even if they're not directly related to the defense and how it scores fantasy points.
So, Ryan, in this article, you used a calculation called R squared. For anybody who's more than just average at math, they're going to know what that is. But somebody like me, I'm like, hey, I'm coming across this, and I'm like, is the layperson going to understand this? And you use R squared, which basically explains a correlation between two. Is coefficients the right word? It's been a while since I took a math class.
Sounds about we'll go with that.
Well, let's go with that. First and foremost, explain R squared for the layperson when they read this article, and explain how completely useless ADP is in projecting what the good fantasy defenses are going to be. Because I don't think you have to know what R squared is to know that 0.03 is not a good one.
Yeah, explain R squared for those other people who don't understand, like people with broadcasting degrees.
Of course. So yeah, I didn't know this question was going to be on the test. I feel like I'm back in college again already. But so R squared is basically describing what percentage of the variation is explained by a variable. So if ADP has a 0.03 R squared to defense scoring, that's basically saying it can only explain 3% of defense scoring, of why the defense scoring is the way it is. So that means it's not very predictive. So
Right.
yeah, if you, and I mean, to be fair, a lot of these other metrics, win totals included, you're not really going to get much higher than like 10 to 15% explaining that much variance.
But it's better.
But it's better. Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, if you guys want to get better at anything like drafting, you need to do it over and over. You got to practice at those things. Why don't you hop over to see our friends at the FFPC? Because right now, all FFPC tournaments that are launching and drafting for 2023 they're ready to go, baby, just except for that main event. We know that kicks off a little later. But we got 2 big-time tournaments with $1 million in grand prizes. The FFPC main event and the FantasyPros Championship. We got Dynasty Startups like Joe and I did. We got an orphan team. You can have all sorts of fun at the FFPC, starting daily at $100 all the way up to $5,000 with these dynasty contests. You want to play best ball? $125 entry into the FFPC Best Ball Tournament, Superflex Best Ball for only $35. They're all firing away. Get over there right now. Get your teams locked and loaded and have some fun. Go to my FFPC for more. Hanging out with our guy, Ryan Heath. Remember, you want to go follow him on the Twitter machine at QBL Ryan. Got to get this guy some more followers. You only got 1,500. We're gonna double that after this show. After this show airs, we're gonna get you all kinds of followers here.
Don't make promises you can't keep, Drake.
Dude,
we'll get them some.
Yeah, we're talking Twitter here and inefficient markets and Elon and all this. I've been sitting at literally the same follower number for like 2 months, and I paid for the stupid blue check mark. They're like, I want my tweets to be seen and blah, blah, blah for content. It didn't help at all. I can't get a follower to save my life. If anyone's out there, at Drake Fantasy, slide into the DMs.
That's you're not really selling Ryan on our podcast right now, Drake.
Yeah,
Ryan, let's
follow Ryan too.
Right. Let's get into the meat and potatoes here, because I'm glad that you used basically just incredibly smart analysis to break down what I actually do in drafting fantasy. I'm never the first person to draft a defense because inevitably somebody's going to take one before the last 2 rounds of a fantasy draft. But what I like to do is just what you said. Good week 1 matchup. I'll bump a team up if it has a projected good week 2 matchup as well. And the teams that are a little bit down in the ADP, these are the teams I want to target. When you're looking to draft defense, you have a couple of categories here. You have draft and hold, and you have draft and see. I'm guessing you're probably not somebody who plans on holding a defense from the start of a season. But explain these 2 categories here, draft and hold, draft and see, and how you like to attack your fantasy defenses in the draft.
Sure. So kind of my top 4 in my rankings are draft and hold. And I consider them that because these are the defenses, at least from the limited predictiveness that we can do. These are the 4 that I think at least are like a clear top tier. So that's the Eagles, the 49ers, the Cowboys, and the Bills. I mean, the reasons for all that, all of those defenses were top 5 last year, top 5 in EPA per play, all of these important metrics that I go over in the article. So just kind of the thought with hold them is if you're going to take one of those defenses and they have like a bad week 1 or a bad week 2, it's probably worth holding on to them just from the tiny little amount of analysis we can do and say, oh, this is probably what a good defense looks like going into the year. I would give them a game or 2 of a leash. But yeah, if any of those 4 don't perform in the first couple of weeks, then you don't actually have to hold them. You never have to hold a defense.
Your tier 2 is draft and see, and there's a couple of names in here of teams that people really want to go out and get. I always see people every year, they want to draft the Baltimore Ravens. They go, oh, Baltimore's good every year. You know, they were 19th last year. So to be honest, they weren't that great. But we've got a healthier secondary coming back. Their offense should be much improved with Lamar Jackson and all the weapons. And as you mentioned earlier in the show, the offense matters. You know, we need a team that can stay on the field and produce some points, unlike in the article you referenced, the Skylar Thompson Miami Dolphins. Talk about your tier 2 here, the draft and C teams.
Yeah, definitely. So as you said, the Ravens definitely stick out for me. If you look at kind of their season long stats, they didn't look great last year. But if you split it up from the first half of the season to the second half of the season, in the first half, they were just 28th in defensive EPA per play. They were top 5 in the second half of the year, and they were a usable defense in fantasy down the stretch as well. That's kind of why I like them. That, along with just some easy early matchups like against the Texans, the Colts, the Steelers. There's just a lot of good looking things for them. Their ADP right now is like DST 9, so you can probably get them somewhat realistically in the final round of a draft. So I do like them a lot. Another team I like that is maybe a little sneakier is the Cincinnati Bengals. So the offense, again, is going to be part of that, but they have like some pretty good pieces on their defense as well. Trey Hendrickson was really good rushing the passer last year. But the Bengals early on get to play Matt Stafford, who still doesn't have an offensive line last I checked, either Ryan Tannehill or Will Levis, and then probably the Colt McCoy Cardinals. Oof. So if they get through like their first 2 divisional games, then they're looking pretty good fairly early on in the season. And I mean, again, they were decent enough last year, great point differential, one of the highest implied win totals for the season. So just a lot of good pieces there.
It's funny because you mentioned the Kansas City Chiefs in this tier. I love Kansas City for fantasy the last few years because they do things exactly like your top 4 draft and hold teams do. They get out ahead with a lead, and in the second half, they can pin their ears back and chase down the quarterback, accumulate sacks, strip sacks, fumbles, and that's really what leads to points for DSTs, especially turnover. So I love Kansas City there. And Joe, I see you got something for him.
Yeah, Ryan, sorry, my buddy who was coming down to golf literally called me while we were on here. He doesn't like to
on the show. What's he think of the defense?
Yeah, he'll give you some 4-letter words. No, Ryan, so here is the other part of this equation. If you're likely drafting a defense and you're not drafting and holding as you don't recommend, is there predictive statistics, predictive metrics that we can use to accurately stream defenses throughout the year? What do the numbers show? I mean, I think we all have our preconceptions. Well, you just want to take the teams that are the biggest favorites, whatnot, against bad quarterbacks. But what does the analysis actually show?
Yeah, so the analysis does show that you do want favorites, of course. You want teams that are not implied a lot of points to be scored against them. So, yeah, big favorites, a low total can help with that, but a low total in itself isn't necessarily going to help. But adding on to that, we have a metric with fantasy points data, which I hear is coming out soon. I keep hearing this, but
it is.
We have pressure metrics called pressure rate over expected and pressure rate over expected allowed. What we can do is look at these 2 metrics for both teams on each side of a game and take the differential of those and find teams that are really good at generating pressure, who are facing teams that also give up a ton of pressure. And it turns out, based on all the linear regressions and the math and stuff, that actually helps us predict even better than just using the betting odds and the implied totals by themselves. So both are important, but the pressure is an element that I think is pretty important, that I think can give you an edge week to week, and that I look forward to talking about throughout the season.
And we've got a great tool at fantasypoints.com that you guys can go use. It's our O-line, D-line matchup tool. We've had that for a while at this site.
It's going to be expanded this year, Drake. But
Woo!
yeah, we're going to have more. We're going to have more of that with fantasy points data, and fortunately, Ryan says the data is pretty predictive in this regard.
I like what I'm hearing there, and if you want to put some of that to the test, why don't you go over to Underdog and just remember, this show's sponsored by Underdog. We have so much fun. We're talking best ball drafts and the biggest fantasy football tournament of all time. Best Ball Mania 4 is live. If you don't know what best ball is, this must be your first time listening to the show then. But here's all you got to do, folks. I'm going to break it down for you quick. Just enter Best Ball Mania on Underdog's mobile app. You draft your team. That's it. Set it. Forget it. There's no lineups. You're not looking for, you don't even have to pick a defense in these leagues, which is even better. Underdog is going to optimize your lineup weekly to create the highest scoring option. It's that easy. Best Ball Mania 4, your shot at first place. It's $3 million. I got to get a piece of this $3 million, Joe. I'm telling you right now. Go over to the App Store, download Underdog Fantasy, use promo code FANTASYPTS. You know the deal by now. We're going to double your first time deposit up to $100 with Fantasy PTS. And when we do that, you're going to get a fantasypoints.com subscription for just $5, a $60 value for $5. Again, folks, use code FANTASYPTS. Sign up today with that code. Get your first deposit double up to $100. Get a fantasypoints.com subscription for $5. Visit underdogfantasy.com or find them in the App Store. And don't forget to register with promo code FANTASYPTS. Remember, folks, you got to be 18 and over, 19 and up in Alabama, Nebraska, sorry, Cornhuskers, you're 21 and up, Massachusetts, and Arizona. Any state that's where Underdog operates, just make sure. Terms apply, folks. It's not a one-size-fits-all proposition. You know that by now. If you're concerned with your play, call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit www.ncpgambling.org. In Arizona, call 1-800-NEXT-STEP. Here in New York, where I am, 1-8778-HOPE-NY. And for you volunteers in Tennessee, 1-800-889-9789. All right, I got that off my chest. We're talking with Ryan Heath. Make sure you're following him at QBL Ryan on Twitter. So it's my draft. I'm rocking and rolling. I got a couple IPAs in me, right? I'm trying to be smarter than the average bear. Who am I streaming week one once the Jokers take, the Eagles in the 7th round, someone takes San Francisco in round 10, and I'm just collecting running backs and wide receivers. But I need someone here, right? So who am I streaming in week one?
Sure, yeah, I've got a couple good week one streamers for you. Both of these should be easily draftable in most leagues. The first is going to be the New Orleans Saints. So in week one, they're currently 3.5-point favorites at home against the Titans. We don't know if it's going to be Tannehill. Maybe it's Levis week one somehow. But either way, the Titans were second worst in QB pressure rate over expected allowed last season. That's that very predictive pressure metric. So could be a lot of sacks getting dialed up in that game. And even beyond then, I kind of like how the Saints are looking. They get the Panthers, the Packers, the rebuilding Buccaneers right after that. So that's a good defense to draft with the intention to stream for 1 week. But hey, maybe things work out and you end up holding on to them a little longer. And then my second week one streamer I really like right now is the Washington Commanders. So they were quietly pretty efficient on defense last year. They were 5th in EPA per play over the whole season. And in week one, they played the Colt McCoy Cardinals. So, I wouldn't expect the Commanders to be a great fantasy defense season long, just with their 6.5 win total. They're probably not going to be controlling most game scripts, but for the beginning of the season, that's also not a bad place to start.
I love that. I'm really digging that Saints pick. Nobody in your home league is picking the Saints up in the draft.
I always have to come up with one that I want in every league, Drake, where I actually draft defenses, because I like to be, we're in so many leagues where I just like to be on the same page with myself. So I think last year it might've been the Colts or something. I thought they got off to a great start, or maybe that was 2 years ago, but I just drafted this low ADP defense in every league. That's how I approach it. And that's how Ryan's going to approach it for us this year. Ryan is actually, Drake, going to But I'm going to make this announcement right on the podcast, Ryan. Now, things are
Breaking
subject
news.
to change. Things are subject to change. Do you know? We have so much analysis at fantasypoints.com. We got Brett Whitefield's prospect guy. We got Hansen's draft plan, and we got Brawley's best bets, and we got me doing whatever the hell I'm going to do. We got Graham Barfield doing stat packs, Scott Barrett doing the DFS breakdown. Do you know what is one of the single most read articles on the entire website?
Oh, it's got to be defensive streamers.
Streaming defenses.
I read it
Ryan's
every
gonna
week.
Ryan's gonna do that this year. And look, it makes sense though, right? Ryan, you even wrote in the article, don't worry about calculating all this shit. We're going to do it for you. So we're looking forward to it. He is a rising star in the industry. QBL Ryan Heath. Thanks so much for joining us, man. Drake, thanks for Ryan, thanks for being on, talking some defenses. Not a sexy topic, but a necessary one. And this is where the edge is. No doubt about it.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, guys. I love talking about these kind of little mini games within the game of fantasy football. That's kind of fun for me. I don't think I'm quite as psycho as Jake Tribby is with the spring football stuff, but I hope I can live in that shadow a little bit.
He legitimately loves it. Like the thing about Tribby that's awesome is like, I remember a couple of years ago when I was with another site, and we're like, well, the XFL's starting. Do we have to do this? And I guess we do. DraftKings is going to have content. And Tribby's like, give it to me. I want to do it. I want to do it now. So I do not have to convince him. Hey, Jake, do you think we need a USFL article? Yes, we do.
It's already done. Here it is.
We need three. So, no, that's great, man. I just love having you guys enthusiastic about stuff like this because it fires me up too. And it's a useful article. It's one of those articles where like Drake actionable is the word, right? We love that word actionable. Streaming defenses is actionable article.
Oh my gosh. I read that every single week. And there's always people searching for that info because they're streaming and they got to know, all right, well, listen, am I picking up the Vikings this week? Titans got a good matchup. Who can I get next week? Before we get out of here, let me ask you this, Ryan and Joe. What are your thoughts, even early in the season, about carrying multiple defenses? If you know, I got this one next week, I got the great buy here, I got good matchups. What are your thoughts?
Can you can I answer this, Ryan? Because I want to hear your. Well, I have a very hard and fast rule. No freaking way early in the season. However, come playoff time, I think it's a shrewd move. Depending on bench size, but I want to hear. Sorry, Ryan, I stepped on your toes there, but I have a very hard and fast opinion there. Yeah.
I agree completely. Yeah. You cannot, the opportunity cost of using an extra roster spot on a defense early in the year when there are all these running backs and wide receivers that could potentially fall into volume, be the beneficiary of an ambiguous backfield, get an injury in front of them. You want to be using these bench spots on the more impactful, more upside heavy positions. But yeah, I agree with Joe. Later on in the season, if you can plan out like your week 14, 15, 16, 17 matchups in the playoffs with covering it with two different defenses, yeah, absolutely do that.
I mean, like, how many people? No offense, I'm not picking on Hansen here, but how many people kept Sky Moore on their roster in week 15, 16 when a second defense probably would have been a better use of resources? Because when we're doing a fantasy,
you're blocking someone else too.
Yeah, no doubt. That when we're doing a fantasy draft, we don't know the answers to the test. We're taking an educated guess at the answers to the test. But for guys like the sleeper rookie wide receivers, second-year wide receivers, by week 13, we know the answers to the test. You know, so yeah, that I'm totally cool keeping a second defense at that time.
All right, our guest today, Mr. Ryan Heath on Twitter at QBL. Ryan, thank you so much for the time. Joe at FG_Dolan. I am at Drake Fantasy, and I'll also be streaking the 18th green at the PGA in Rochester on Saturday. Just check me out on TV. I'll be hard to miss. But thank you, everybody, for checking us out here on the 2 Point Stance. Remember, leave us a nice review on your podcast platform. Subscribe to that YouTube channel. We get so much great content going up over there on YouTube. The whole team is just really coming together. It's a lot of fun. So don't forget to go over and check out Fantasy Points on YouTube. Until then, we'll see you later in the 2 Point Stance.